Hi, my name is Mal. This is a short story I made called Eyes of Goreth.
August was taking a nap on the car ride to town. She was sleeping rather peacefully until something interrupted it. Her mind suddenly flooded with horrific images of eyes being sliced by something invisible and distorted figures. She woke up suddenly, breathing heavily. She looked over at the person she was going to be investigating the town's disappearances and murders with, Chris. He was still fast asleep, despite being knocked around slightly by the bumpy car ride. August hoped he wouldn't have a nightmare like hers, as she didn't want to hear his theories about what it meant. All this guy talked about was supernatural and mythical creatures, and it drove her nuts. She was embarrassed to even be seen around him. She sighed and drifted back off to sleep in the car. It was day, but the two of them were not staying awake for a 6 hour car ride, and August soon forgot all about the haunting dream. The car jerked and bounced over the unfinished gravel road as the car sped towards the town, the speed causing August's long brown hair to whip around her face. Chris glanced over at the tornado of hair and quietly laughed under his breath. His good mood was quickly cut short as he felt the photos in his hand. He felt the smooth, sharp edges of them and glanced down at the gruesome images. Hey, August? Chris asked, not taking his eyes off the photos. When he got no answer, he continued, "Did you see these yet?" Chris handed August the photos. She snatched them from his hand and held her hair away from her eyes. "People can do some really horrific things, huh?" August said, flipping through the small stack of photos, the light reflecting off them, hitting her eyes, causing her to blink rapidly. She stopped flipping through when she saw a photo of a forest. "Alright, what's this supposed to be? We have mangled corpses and a picture of a forest. What's the deal with this picture?" August asked, flipping the photo towards Chris. "You're not gonna like what I say," Chris began to say before being cut off. "Chris, if you say it's werewolves or demons or something like that, I'm jumping out of this car," August snapped, putting the photo back on her lap. "It's not out of the question. There's a silhouette between those two trees. It has horns. It is huge," Chris exclaimed defensively. "Just look at the photos. I'd rather believe a monster did that than a person." August thought about what Chris said, but she didn't know what she would prefer. To think a person could do that, or to think a fairy tale creature did that. But she knew the truth. Monsters are just make-believe things to put in horror movies. Nothing more. "Almost there. We'll be in town in a few minutes." The driver's voice brought August back out from her thoughts. "All right," August called through the loud wind of the driver's side window. After quite a few minutes of silence, the car comes to a stop. "Thanks again for agreeing to drive us to town, Oscar." "No problem. Always happy to help you guys out," Oscar replied, helping the two get their stuff together. As they walked away, Oscar shouted, "Good luck with the mystery solving!" August looked up at the town. This is where those photos were taken, and none of them did any justice to show how unsettling this place really was. Wispy fog slithered around the hauntingly run-down-looking town. The sun was blocked out by the clouds, and the town looked like it had been untouched for years. But it wasn't a ghost town. People filled the inside of homes, and a few cars drove down the road. The tires on the dirt road caused dust to fly up in clouds of almost transparent tan. "How do people live in this place?" August asked Chris as they walked further into town. "Don't be rude," Chris mumbled to August. "But hey, we could find out. We have to ask around anyways." Their conversation was cut short by someone walking up to them. "You two are detectives or something, right?" The man asked the two of them. He looked very disheveled, with scruffy red hair and an open flannel over his shirt. August gave Chris a glare when she saw Chris about to say something. If Chris said so much as one thing about monsters to this guy, she was going to be so mad. "Well, I suggest you check out this person's house. She's suspicious," he said, handing them the address of the suspicious person, which August pocketed. Chris was about to ask the man's name, but he left right after August took the scrap of paper. The two roamed down the streets until they came across a massive house with the same address that was on the paper. The house cast a massive cold shadow over them. August felt especially chilled. Something about this place sent a feeling of uneasiness through her. "I think this is the place," August said silently to Chris, as she double-checked the address on her paper and began walking up to the house. Chris followed behind, looking paranoid and terrified. August couldn't believe Chris got a job as a detective at all. With every step towards the door they took, a chill ran up their spines. They had been wandering around for so long, the sun had begun to set. The sunset would have been beautiful if they weren't standing in front of this nightmarish mansion. The town had gone silent, and the only noise was their footsteps in the gravel. August knocked on the front door, the loud noise making Chris jump. Through the door they could hear a muffled yell. "What the hell do you want?" boomed a woman's voice from inside. From the light under the door, a shadow appeared. "Excuse me, but we are investigating some of the incidents that have happened in this town. Could we come in?" August asked. A sigh could be heard from inside, and the door swung open to reveal a figure that towered over the two detectives. Her straight gray hair looked like it hadn't been washed or brushed in weeks. She didn't look old enough for her hair to be gray from age. She wore gloves over her fingers that looked too long to be normal, and a surgical mask covering her pointed face. What sun was left made her skin glow because of how pale she was. Her foot tapped impatiently. She did not look thrilled whatsoever to see them. Her face twisted into a grimace when she saw their uniforms. "Before you ask, my name is Gray, and I couldn't care less about what your names are," she remarked, looking down at August and Chris. "All right, make it quick, and don't make a mess of my house," Gray said with a low and slightly gravelly voice. But the two wouldn't have to worry about making a mess. The place was already a pigsty. It smelled rancid and looked about as nice as it smelled. There were fast food wrappers and dirty dishes everywhere. The wallpaper was peeling and scratches lined the wall. A few dents and holes were scattered around them as well. "Oh, do you have cats?" Chris asked Gray somewhat excitedly, but Gray's gaze brutally tore away any hopefulness he had. Gray paused for a moment before responding. "Wild animal got in a while ago. Made a bit of a mess." August could tell a lie when she heard one, even through Gray's seemingly constant monotone voice. The long pause and unspecific answer had given it away to August, telling her that Gray must have something to hide. August noticed a trap door hidden by darkness. It gave her an uncomfortable and unnerving feeling, but she brushed it off as just a basement, for now at least. "Are you sick or something? Why are you wearing a mask?" Chris questioned Gray, and she quickly snapped back in answer. "No, I'm not sick. I just don't want to get sick." Gray tried to cross her arms, but she seemed to be having trouble, like she wasn't used to doing it. She just looked uncomfortable in general, almost as if her body proportions were new to her. She then narrowed her eyes at the paper sticking out of August's pocket. "My brother sent you here, didn't he?" Gray asked, looking at August, sending a chill down her spine. Red hair, looks like the definition of messy, which was rich coming from Gray, whose house looked like it had been ransacked. "Maybe. I don't remember exactly what he looked like," August lied. She didn't know Gray, but she was smart enough to know that telling her brother sold her out would not end well. Gray raised an eyebrow. She didn't believe August at all. "Well, are you two going to ask some relevant questions, or are you going to continue to question the state of my home and how I dress?" Gray asked impatiently. She clearly wanted to get this over with. Just then the smell of something burning drifted into the room, causing Gray's nose to wrinkle under her mask. "Great," Gray remarked sarcastically, shoving August aside to get to the kitchen. "What are you cooking?" Chris asked, peeking into the kitchen, which looked just as bad as the living room. Various stains covered the wall, causing the wallpaper to mold and distort. August walked in and tried not to immediately gag. The house already smelled rancid, but this was far worse. August sped backwards out of the kitchen almost immediately after the smell hit her nose. "Oh, are you two going to critique my food now?" "I was making steak until two annoyances entered my house. So now it looks more like charcoal," Gray explained, aggressively stabbing the steak with a fork and holding it up off the pan. Gray wasn't kidding about the steak looking like charcoal. It looked dry and burnt enough to catch fire any second. Gray dropped the steak and the fork back onto the pan, then turned off the element. A notification from August's phone broke the sudden silence. It was from Oscar. The message read, "Hey, I just heard a few officers are holding someone who's gone nuts. Check out the holding cell at the side of the police station." August showed Chris, then stuffed her phone back into her pocket, crushing the paper with the address underneath it. August and Chris said goodbye to Gray and hastily left the house. Gray glared at them as they wandered down the dimly lit street. Once the two were at the police station, two officers led them to a relatively small cell. The town itself wasn't very large or crime-ridden, until recently, that is. So they were very unprepared for when the brutal murders began, as it was so unexpected. This place went from a kind little town to a paranoid town no one visits. Inside the cell, there was a teenage girl leaning her forehead against the bars, looking down. She was mumbling something to herself. She was wearing a red sweater with a large 4 on it, written in a red substance. A loud metallic bang echoed through the room as she slammed her fist on the bars. "Hey there," Chris said, walking up to the cell. "Are you possessed by a—" "Okay, Chris is not asking any more questions," August interrupted Chris. "Chris, I can't believe you almost asked her that," she scolded Chris. Chris paused for a second. "All right, then who's Goreth? It's written on the wall in blood." August looked startled. She looked at the shady back of the cell for the first time, and sure enough, in big red dripping letters, the name Goreth was written. "Goreth, is that your name?" When she heard the name, she snapped back. "My name is 4. Let me out of here right now." "Whoa, that was aggressive," August comments, as she wasn't expecting that at all. "Is that your actual name?" 4 glared at August with closed eyes. "I don't remember. My name is just 4. "So then, who is Goreth?" August asked. "The name you wrote on the wall." 4 didn't respond. Instead, she backed up to the center room and brutally tore her own finger off. Bones popped and snapped, flesh ripped and tore, and blood began to flow down her hand. Hearing that actually happen was so much more sickening than movie violence. August couldn't look away, and the sight and noises disturbed her so much she was paralyzed. While this was happening, she also realized 4 was already missing a finger, which must have been how she wrote Goreth on the wall. August heard Chris shouting and an officer fumble with keys to try and stop 4, who had started drawing something on the floor underneath her. How could she see with her eyes closed, August wondered. It resembled an eye, however it was split diagonally and horizontally. 4 then opened her eyes. What lay underneath 4's eyelids was a missing eye, and the eye that was there had been sliced diagonally and horizontally like the symbol. The symbol suddenly lit up, illuminating the room in an unsettling blood red. The red light began to strobe and flicker as 2 cuts appeared on her face. They grew bigger and bigger as demonic jaws began pushing themselves out. 4's skin completely peeled off, revealing a horrific creature. It vaguely resembled some kind of canine, if its hide had been torn off. From its unnaturally yellow-toothed jaws came a haunting noise. It sounded like the combination of a snarl and someone choking. The light completely faded, and from the dark the monstrosity charged at the bars, colliding with them head first, causing the officer to fall backwards. Chris went to go help the officer up, but August stopped him. She pulled him back before the creature slammed into the bars again. This time the bars fell, pinning the officer down under them. The creature snarled again and pounced on the officer. The 2 heard a loud cry before sickening tears and crunches echoed through the room. The creature's eyes seemed to tear up, making it look like it was crying. Crocodile tears, August thought to herself. She had remembered how crocodiles looked like they were crying when they ate prey, but they didn't actually feel bad. This thing was probably just trying to keep its eye wet, since it didn't look like it could blink. It couldn't actually be feeling bad, whatever the hell this thing was. "August, this is our chance. Come on, let's get out of here," Chris whispered, pulling August's arm as he began backing away. August nodded and they made a dash for the door, swinging it open. They made a dash to what they thought was the exit, but it wasn't. A loud crash made them jump. August pointed to a table covered with various papers on top and boxes at the bottom of it. They quickly shoved some boxes away to make room for themselves. They tried to slow their breathing as they looked out the small openings between the boxes, illuminating lines of light on their terrified faces. I'm sorry I never listened to what you were saying before, but if you have some explanation for what the hell just happened, I would love to hear it, August whispered to Chris. I am just as confused as you are. It's probably got something to do with something demonic, because that's the only thing I can think of to be that messed up, Chris replied, not looking away from the opening in the boxes by him. Thanks, Captain Obvious. I would have never guessed. I'm assuming you don't know how to kill it? August whispered, and Chris shook his head. He was about to say something, but August put her hand over his mouth and shushed him. A conversation could be heard from the hallway right outside the door. One of the voices sounded familiar. It was Gray. I see you managed to get out yourself. I didn't think you were smart enough to even open a door, Gray's muffled voice said. Even though it was muffled, August could tell there was something wrong with it, since you were one of the group of idiots that started this whole thing. I'm sorry, responded a barely legible voice. It was like if sandpaper had a voice. Whatever it was saying, it sounded in pain, gasping for breath like it had been crying. We didn't mean to. I'm glad you all are suffering now. You kids deserve it. You were her best friend for. You should have stopped her. Gray scolded what once was for. August gasped when she realized Gray was talking to the creature. You were the sensible one. You should have stopped them from summoning Goreth in the first place. Gray practically screamed at it. Maybe you shouldn't have introduced your niece to that stuff in the first place. This is your fault, too. Four managed to yell in between wheezes. There was a loud thump and crash, followed by what sounded like demonic coughing, and their footsteps got quieter as they made their way to where the crash was. Find her, Gray demanded. Then the footsteps began to become louder and louder. The door swung open and something stepped into the room. August and Chris held their breath as footsteps circled around the table. No need to hold your breath. I can still hear your two pests' heart beating. Chris was suddenly pulled out from under the table by his feet. August dashed to pull him back, but she wasn't nearly fast enough. She got out from under the table just in time to see Gray throw Chris at a filing cabinet. There was a loud bang as Chris collided with it. Gray looked even more distorted than she had before. She was more lanky than before, but still managed to throw Chris, who was probably heavier than her. August charged at Gray and tried to punch her, but she grabbed August's fist and held her in the air by it. August kicked Gray hard in the stomach, and she dropped August. Gray stumbled back, and August ran at her again. She tore off Gray's surgical mask, revealing uneven, blood-stained teeth that stuck out from her torn mouth. Some of her teeth looked like shards of glass, while others looked somewhat normal. She had no gums. She just had a deformed skull with various teeth sticking out. The rest of her face looked sunken in as well, so you could almost see her skull right under her skin, which looked like it was so tightly stretched onto her skull it was going to rip apart any second. August gasped and backed away. Gray was about to charge at her before some officers grabbed her from behind. Gray thrashed and struggled, trying to get free, probably wanting to tear them apart limb from limb. Gray, what on earth is going on? August demanded, knowing those officers wouldn't be able to hold Gray for very long. Gray glared at August before responding. Some idiot kids messed with stuff they shouldn't have. Long story short, they released things that are causing. Gray pointed at her mouth. This. Is there an explanation that doesn't sound like a campfire story? August asked. Does what's happening to me look like a campfire story to you? Gray screamed at August. The way her mouth moved was disturbing. The skin and muscles on her cheeks ripped as she yelled. August noticed Gray's fingernails were tearing through the fabric on her gloves. August realized they had to leave now. August helped Chris up and they got out of the police station in a hurry. She knew Gray's house would have more answers. August, why are we here of all places? Chris asked when the two of them arrived at the house. It has to have more answers. There's no way it doesn't, August answered, heading up to the door. Surprisingly, it was unlocked, but August was stopped by a tug on her arm. There's no way this isn't some sort of trap. Who just leaves their door unlocked? August, this is a terrible idea. Chris tried to convince August. But it was no use. August wanted answers, and she was going to get them. She swung the door open and walked inside. The place was lit by a few dim candles, so August used her phone flashlight to look around. She told Chris to go check downstairs, while she went upstairs to look around. He protested because of how gross and creepy it was, but August had made up her mind. August walked up the creaky stairs and was greeted with a dark hallway. When she shined her lights in the rooms, the shadows inside danced across the walls as her eyes played tricks on her. Something in one of the rooms caught her eye. She couldn't quite tell what the room was used for. Storage for Halloween decorations? A chill ran up her spine as she stepped into the room. She walked over to a strange table which had a book on it. The table was lit by a candle that had melted onto a deer skull, and another skull looked like a person's. Must be a replica. At least I hope it is, August thought to herself. She picked up the book and began flipping through pages. The book was some sort of journal Gray had. Not only was there some pretty disturbing details in it, but the sketches were horrifying as well. One contained a horrifying creature with a single sideways eye on its forehead. It had splits diagonally and horizontally on its face down to its neck, which allowed it to open its face. It had the name Goreth below it. That same symbol 4 had drawn was on it as well. August decided to check the book for an explanation. She began reading. Cedar shouldn't have gone in there. I know she stole one of the books. I should have been more serious over where my niece could and couldn't go. August skipped ahead. I knew this wouldn't end well. Her and her 4 friends summoned something. The main monstrosity they summoned is named Goreth, a one-eyed demon obsessed with eyes and seeing people eat each other. It renamed them 1, 2, 3, 4, and my niece, 5. When they summoned Goreth, it released some sort of demonic and cannibalistic spirits to possess people. August stopped reading for a second when she heard movement. She assumed it was a rat, as this place was gross enough that there was probably tons. The spirits seemed to be trying to copy Wendigos, in appearance and the way they act. Wendigos are a First Nation Algonquian legend to warn people against greed and cannibalism, 2 things Goreth is very fond of. However, the ones that possessed those kids were different. They looked like some sort of hellhound. But Cedar. 5, unlike her friends, since she was the sort of leader to the group and ran away when Goreth appeared, she's dealing with the same kind of demonic Wendigo spirit I am. August's heart skipped a beat when she finally realized just how much danger she and Chris were in the first time they had been in this house. I feel like I'm freezing from the inside out, and I'm constantly starving. I've given up on trying to fix my house. I'm breaking everything. I'm trying to prevent my nails from growing any longer by scratching the walls, but it's not working. Nothing is working. This town is going to be massacred, and it's all my fault. One of the skulls fell off the shelf, making August jump when she heard it hit the floor. She quickly skimmed through the rest of the page. I can't stop this. Why not join the fun? August tried to read the next pages, but they were all too gruesome to completely read. A ton of detailed murders. August had to put the book down, but when she did, she saw something. In the corner of the room, a shadowy antlered creature stood, with white piercing eyes and a haunting grin. It slowly walked towards her before leaping at her. August gasped and expected to feel the impact of something crashing into her, but she didn't. She looked back and the creature was gone. Terrified, she grabbed the book and stumbled out of the room. As she walked back down the stairs, she felt a strange cold feeling, but ignored it. Chris, did you find anything? August called, shining her light down onto the first floor. Nothing other than a giant mess, Chris responded, shielding his eyes from the light. However, August noticed something immediately as she stepped off the stairs. The trapdoor from before. But as she was on her way to open it, there was a knock on the door. August froze. There was a long creak as the front door opened. A familiar face was standing in the doorway, covered in bullet wounds and slightly limping. It was Gray. August opened her eyes. She was in almost complete darkness. Her eyes slowly adjusted, but she wished they hadn't. She was next to Chris, or rather Chris's lifeless corpse. That was when all the pain set in. She was about to scream before she realized she couldn't. She painfully reached her arm up. It was covered in scratches, as well as missing large chunks of flesh. She felt where her jaw should be, but it wasn't there. How was she alive? She felt like the inside of her was filled with dry ice. She could barely even move. She looked up and saw the same trapdoor from under the stairs. This time, underneath it.